Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, Missouri beats Central Florida, or UCF if you'd like.
They would. They've spent a lot of money branding that lately, so they would prefer you call them UCF.
Okay. 38-10. Pretty convincing victory. Built on the back of the defense mostly. In the first half, UCF really controlled the game, controlled the ball, kept Missouri off the field. Trailed only by 4 points. Second half, though, Missouri forces 4 turnovers, scores directly on one of them, and kind of controls the game with their defensive line. Just your thoughts, as a team, they've got this long streak of forcing a turnover 47 straight games, which leads the nation. How sustainable is that? Is it something that you can start to depend on with this Missouri team, that they're going to have a turnover edge?
You'd like to think that at some point it would stop and they can't just depend on a big turnover every game, but they have every game since 2000, late in 2010. So, it seems as if Gary Pinkel always says, they preach turnovers all the time, and it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether they get them or not. But for the past, 3.5 years, they're almost 4 years now, they have been getting them. So, this seems like a team that expects to get turnovers and is kind of just waiting for someone to make that play, and somebody usually does. And I think some of it has to do with, kind of what you wrote about in your column in Sunday's paper, in that if they can keep getting that pressure on the pocket like they always do, it's kind of a cumulative effect over the game. Whereas, maybe in the first or second quarter, the quarterback or the offensive players are kind of more set in their ways or more comfortable or things like that. But then as the game goes on, they get a little more antsy and they get a little looser and things like that, and the turnovers start coming. So I think it is something they've come to depend on, and it's something they can come to depend on as long as they keep, putting the pressure on the offense like they have been for at least the last 2 years that I've been here.
Yeah, I think some people sort of see it as a crapshoot. I know, like, when you look at the Phil Steele preseason guide, he's always wanting to take teams that had a great turnover advantage one year and say they're going to drop off because of the law of averages. But I would say this, that I think teams that can really rush the passer are going to create a lot more turnovers. One, because you're going to get strip sacks like Missouri got twice last year. Two, you're going to affect the quarterback's judgment. So those are big things, and especially if that pressure is coming up the middle, I think that disrupts everything. So that's a big factor. I think also where there's a talent gap between two teams, you'll see the team with less talent, at some point they start trying to make plays they're not quite athletically capable of and taking bigger risks. I think you can see it there. And there is a certain amount occasionally with luck, like the Josh Augusta interception that happened to hit a guy in the helmet. He had to make a good play on it, but obviously there's a little bit of luck involved. But I think the other factors, it is pretty controllable. And then obviously Missouri does preach, everybody preaches turnovers, but it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize line. And I think evidently they emphasize it because over the course of his career, they've been pretty good at that sort of thing. Now, as they move into after this week, and as they move into SEC play, the talent gap is going to shrink. It'll be basically equal, or Missouri in some cases will have less talent. So I think you'll probably see those numbers level off a little, but they do have a really good pass rushing defensive line. So I think that part of it they've got in their back pocket for the whole season.
Yeah, and it seems as if either the turnovers come at advantageous times or places on the field, or the offense knows what to do with it afterwards. And in some cases, both. In every game this year, you can see South Dakota State, Deron Singleton had the interception return to the 10-yard line, and Arion Penton picked off a pass, in the other end zone for a touchback. Against Toledo, there was, Bud ripping the ball out to not let Toledo set up at the 10-yard line, and then there was Arion Penton returning that interception inside the 30, and then against UCF on Saturday, like you said, is Josh Augusta, playing basketball and boxing out an offensive lineman to get that interception that Missouri then cashed in 4 plays later to kind of get more breathing room. So I guess it's a mixture of getting the turnovers, but then also knowing what to do with them once they've gotten them. Not just sitting on the ball and hoping for another one the next time.
Missouri's kind of steadily improved through these 3 games. Their final non-conference game at home on Saturday against Indiana, you could sort of define it as a trap game maybe, in that Indiana's coming off a loss to Bowling Green, doesn't really have an impressive football legacy there, and then the next week Missouri's got that huge game at South Carolina. Indiana's a team that can score a lot of points but can give up more often. Just so your thoughts on how big a threat Indiana might be to Missouri.
I mean, I think coming into the season, I really thought Indiana was the second easiest non-conference game that they were going to play, and I feel like that's still the same. They did lose to Bowling Green, so I guess you could spin that as saying, well, now they're motivated to get back on track and everything. But I mean, I remember last year, everybody expected the Bowling Green game to be a close one with Indiana, and they ended up blowing Bowling Green out of the water going into the Missouri game, and everybody thought, oh, now they're going to play Missouri close, and that didn't really happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't see that kind of turning around this year. And the main reason is, like you said, that defense. They just can't stop teams that are even competent on offense. It seems like they just give up 500 to 600 yards and 35 to 40 points a pop every time out. And they've got a new defensive coordinator in this year that it doesn't seem to have taken hold quite yet. They're trying a new 3-4 scheme, and they're trying sorts of things to get it turned around on defense, but the offense doesn't do them any favors because they're going to run 100 plays and they're going to go really fast, and their scoring drives are going to be a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and then that defense, which has deficiencies, doesn't get any time to rest or kind of game plan for the next series. So it doesn't seem as if a game that should worry Missouri all that much, because they are going to be able to move the ball, and I feel like they've got a better defense than Indiana that has a better chance of putting up 2 or 3 stops on series than Indiana does.
Indiana does have a quarterback, Nate Sudfeld, big strapping man that can throw the ball. Then they have a good running back in Tevin Coleman, who he's a guy that almost got 1,000 yards last year and is off to a good start this year. I think he got like 190 against Bowling Green. So they got good skill. It's just a matter, like you said, of whether if Indiana can turn it into a shootout game, meaning that Missouri isn't stopping them, then that's what they're looking for. I almost think this game is going to, whether it's close or not, is probably going to be a lot more about what's going on between Missouri's ears. If they are fully engaged, I think they can handle business fairly easily. If they're not, if they're mine's wandering a bit to that SEC opener, it could get to be a little bit of a scary game, because if you're not scoring points fairly regularly, you got a chance to get into a tussle with Indiana, because they probably can score. Lastly, we're going to look at SEC. It was kind of an interesting weekend in the SEC. Great game. South Carolina beating Georgia. South Carolina really needed the game to kind of keep their hopes alive in the SEC East, but by winning it, you could almost argue they're now in the driver's seat in the SEC East, although some of the teams haven't even gotten started yet, such as Missouri. Yeah. Also, Kentucky on the road at Florida, a place where they haven't beaten Florida, period, since 1986, and come very close to doing so, but losing triple overtime. Also, some other notable SEC games. Arkansas pounds Texas Tech at Tech, really dominated them with the running game. Tennessee loses about the way you thought they might at Oklahoma. So those are kind of the main ones. Just your thoughts on what you saw this weekend out of the SEC, and if that changed any perceptions.
Well, I mean, I think the main things we can gather are for the East race, and it just seemed to me as if it all kind of pinched everybody towards the middle. It seems like South Carolina and Georgia are just about as good as each other. And looking at South Carolina's loss to Texas A&M in the first week, maybe they're just not that good, both of them. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're both, 8 and 9 win teams rather than 10 and 11 win teams. If all the schedules were held even, if they had to play an SEC West schedule, say, or something like that. And then, we haven't gotten to see Missouri against SEC competition yet, so we really can't say how good they are, if they're better or worse than we thought they were going to be. And then the fact is, going into the season, everybody was talking up Florida as if this was a renaissance year for them. I always thought they were a 7-5 team, and they look like a 7-5 team, and maybe Kentucky's a 6-6 team.
Well, it won't be a 7-5 team, because right? We won't play 11 games.
They'll be a 6-5 team or a 7-4 team. So that I didn't think Florida was that good, and that kind of confirmed it. Maybe Kentucky's further along than I thought they were, and same thing for Tennessee. They lose by 24, but the score shouldn't have been that bad, because they had a 100-yard pick six when they were driving in to score against Oklahoma. So maybe Tennessee's a little better than I thought they were too. And it all to me just seems like everybody in the East is just kind of like scrunching towards 7-5 almost, or scrunching towards 4-4 or 5-3 in the conference. And it's just kind of a mess. So that's kind of how I saw that weekend panning out for the East.
I'll tell you one team that's probably not scrunching towards the middle, and that's Vanderbilt. They did win, but they got a little lucky to do so against UMass. I think that's a team that could probably go winless. So I think you can sort of strike them from the race. Florida, I'm kind of with you. I think a lot of people thought they might be better this year just because there's no way they were going to be this injured 2 years in a row, and there's no way that their new offensive coordinator could be as troubled as their last one. But I don't know. I just feel some bad mojo with that program. They just look like they are ready for something bad to happen at all times, at least in that Kentucky game they did. I'm not sold on them either. I do think Kentucky's a lot better than they were last year. I think Tennessee is a lot better than they were last year. Whether that translates into winning 2 games in the SEC or 3 or 4, I'm not sure. I don't think they're ready to play with South Carolina and Georgia. Missouri is really the wild card just because they haven't played anybody significant. So that's I guess maybe the interesting thing going forward is, is Missouri of a caliber with Georgia or South Carolina, which is what we will find out in a couple weeks.
And it also seems as if a year that Missouri fans should be just thankful that they're in the East, because it seems like the West is usually better than the East, at least for the last couple of years, but it seems like this year especially the West is just so much better than the East, it seems like. You've got a team like Arkansas, which was supposed to be the 0-8 doormat, and they go into Lubbock and hand Texas Tech, which is at least a bowl team from the Big 12, a 21-point loss, and that's the worst team in the West. Whereas, like you were saying, the worst team in the East is needing a missed field goal at the end of regulation from UMass, which had been 2-24 in the FBS to win. So yeah, it's just, I guess Missouri fans should be thankful they're in the East this year.
Yeah, and last year. But I think Arkansas is an interesting case because, you kind of wondered what Brett Bielema was thinking when he leaves Wisconsin, where he had just a prime spot to go to the Rose Bowl all the time, because especially now the way the Big Ten is divided, he just would have had no competition. To go to Arkansas, where even if you make some pretty good improvement, where's the room to climb the ladder there? But what you saw, I think, against Texas Tech was he's going to do what he does, which is run the ball. And I think if he runs up against a team that's physically deficient, like Texas Tech is, very much a kind of I'd call him a finesse team. Whether that game is played home, road, wind, snow, on the moon, it doesn't matter. They're gonna be able to dominate. Now, I think when he runs up against teams that are physically superior to him, which is Alabama, LSU, Auburn, which we already saw, it's going to be a little different story because you don't have much of a passing game to even things up. So, but Missouri's going to play those guys at the end of the year, and I think they're better than what they were given credit for, certainly before the season started. Some of the games that kind of you looked at as could be like a gimme game for Missouri, like Kentucky, no longer looks like a gimme game. Going to Tennessee looks pretty difficult. So really for Missouri, I think you haven't seen what they've got yet, but I think you're starting to get the pictures colored in a little more about what other teams are going to have. All right, well, we'll talk a little more about SEC next week after Missouri finishes off the non-conference schedule.